I feel like I've always had a lot of these feelings of just, sadness and, even abandonment at times. But it really came to a head when I was in high school, my freshman year. My grades just started to plummet, and I'd always been a pretty good student, like to think.
Yeah.
And I was just feeling anxious all the time. It was so hard for me to do anything. I think it was the transition into high school where it really became apparent that these feelings that I was experiencing were making it so hard for me to function in the world with the way that I was interacting with them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Emily was always a sensitive kid. From the moment you were born, you just were very aware and very observant and really, taking all the world in. And you were really cautious about people you would go to. And, you just always had an extra sensitivity to the world. So, it never surprises me when I hear you say you always felt like you felt all these feelings all the time. It was just your ability to feel them and express them that started to change. So, yeah, I think, and I had depression when I was younger too, so I definitely, the irony of it is that you see it in your kids, but you hope it's not there, right? And so you try to create conditions to make them feel better and to fix it. And so I think that even though Emily had always felt these feelings, under the surface, they hadn't been given a place to emerge, because in addition to trying to keep the kids okay and their dad okay and me okay with all those things happening, I was very invested in kind of tampering down the feelings. So I think that's how it was before. Yeah. I think it's always hard when your kids are going through those middle school, high school years, because you're not sure what's typical growing pains and typical, trying to individualize, and then what's something that isn't, typical. And so I think for us, the first thing we both noticed was your grades. It was a lot harder for you to focus at night to get your homework done. It was really torturous for you, to focus and to get your homework done. And I know that was frustrating for you because you liked school, and you liked learning. So that was something that was frustrating for you. Sometimes wanting someone close by, and then sometimes wanting no one around at all. And that you weren't sure, right, about, what do I really want here? And that was something that was hard, I think, as a caregiver to understand, how can I help? Yeah.
I know that in terms of looking into treatment, it wasn't something I'd really thought about until another family member started going to therapy. And then I know you brought it up a few times, and I was always like, no, it doesn't feel relevant. I don't really know what it would do for me. Feels weird, like too much. And then I don't remember why exactly or what happened, but one time you brought it up again, and I was like, you know what? Sure, let's try this. Let's see how it goes. And I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with the first person we tried. My current therapist of almost 7 years now. She just was someone that I felt like I could really open up to, because she wasn't afraid of looking at the hard feelings with me and sitting in that discomfort with me. I think getting into treatment wasn't that difficult in terms of finding someone. It was during the treatment, navigating that process, that was really hard.
So we did luck out in the beginning in terms of finding a really competent therapist, which is a huge challenge in the mental health system. We asked a friend who I know whose son was going through a hard time, and so she recommended the therapist. So that part, we got really, really lucked out. As a parent, you're navigating so many different aspects. You're watching your kid suffer in most instances, and you feel very helpless. You want to fix it. You want it to be over. You want them to be better, right? Because that's what you want, of course, for our kids, for your kids.
So during the treatment was, I think, the hardest part in terms of navigating what to do. Because when I first started, I was just at one session a week, kind of filling out the waters, and it was helpful. And I think we all agreed that that was, what was best. But a couple of weeks in, after doing more depth work, I realized that I was experiencing a lot of feelings of suicidality, which was really scary for me. When I first started talking about those feelings and realizing you actually happened to be out of town, and so I hadn't really told a lot of my other family members what was going on for me, or that I was even like starting to have these feelings. And so I think it was like I went into therapy that day and I just broke down and I was like, I'm feeling this way. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. And later that night, you know, I gave you a call and I told you what happened, or I think my therapist might have been legally obligated to tell you, one of the two, and you just said, I'm so proud of you for saying that. And I was so happy to hear that, because I was really worried, maybe not that you'd be disappointed, I didn't think that, but just that you'd see me very differently. And I guess it's impossible to avoid someone seeing you differently when you say that, but I think that was my fear, and just to hear that you were proud of me meant so much. And so from then, I think I started going to therapy 2 or 3 times a week. And so that was definitely a big, you know, uptake in what I was doing, and it started interfering just with my life, like having to, you know, go out and go to the office. And it's not something I regret, but it was definitely a lot. And I remember there have been some times where we've, you know, had discussions where you wondered, is it better to go down sessions and have fewer? And, you know, sometimes I have, and then it hasn't worked well. And so that's always been a negotiation, because therapy does cost money, and, you know, every extra session is an extra X number of dollars. And even though it's something that, you know, I've needed in that time, that doesn't mean I don't still feel, you know, guilt about that burden. And so that's been really hard in terms of navigating how the treatment should be done. I remember one time there was a really hard point when I'd gotten on medication before for my depression, but I was considering potentially looking into something with anxiety. And I know it was hard because from your perspective, it was something that I really needed. And so I think it's those discussions that have happened during the treatment that have been the hardest, because it's navigating how to go forward, when to make decisions in terms of increasing or decreasing. And that's been, you know, difficult to navigate at times.
I think another aspect of treatment that was helpful that we kind of had to negotiate was boundaries, you know, and boundaries around when you felt safe, when I could trust that you felt safe. And when and how I would communicate with your therapist. It was really important for you to have your therapeutic relationship be yours, be private, be safe. There were times when I was really scared and didn't understand what was going on. And so, you know, that took some time for us to figure out. Sometimes I would reach out to your therapist and it wasn't appropriate. Or sometimes I would and it was the right thing to do. And so that took some negotiating for us. And sometimes we would actually have written contracts, which were really helpful, that we would all sign around when and who would do what when. So that definitely took some negotiating. And I think from a parent, it's hard because, you know, when your kids are infants and toddlers in elementary school, you know, you make their world in a lot of ways, you know, and then when something goes wrong, you don't know what to do. And then to have another person step in, that all of a sudden your child is completely confiding in, it can be really hard for parents. I think it's something that I wish and eventually did find a therapist to talk to about my own feelings about that. But I think it's really important that parents understand it is hard. It's really hard to know that, you know, you can't and you shouldn't, you know, be the person who fixes your kid's life. Like, you have to give your kids the tools to fix it themselves. So, and it took me a while to understand that I needed to get help too, for me during this, and that's okay. You know, that it's really important that you take care of yourself too. And a lot of that came through conversations that I would have with Emily and her therapist, and they would invite me into their sessions, and being really open, even though it's hard to hear feedback about how you are being, how your input is being received from both the therapist and your child. It's really, really hard, because all you want to do is do the right thing. Yeah, paying for treatment was the hardest part, and I think actually another sort of barrier to really moving fully into what you needed, you know, because of course a lot of treatments aren't covered by insurance, or you have to put the money out first and then you send it to insurance for reimbursement, so there's this lag of the money coming back to you, not to mention all of the time and energy it takes to submit the paperwork to insurance. So it's almost like its own little job to be managing this. And you know, if someone said to me back then, you can have this amount of money in 7 years, or you can have your daughter healthy and alive, it's not a question. So at the time, it's hard to understand because it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money quickly, and it can definitely influence your decisions about, do you really need 2 days a week? Do you really need this medication? But I mean, I would rather have you 1,000 times over. I would rather have you. I think that we're lucky because we have resources, and we have family members that I always knew that if the bottom fell out, I had a place to go. That's not the case with most people. And so I think when we talk about these systems of mental health that need to change, there has to be a way to support people so that the money issue isn't the forefront of the mind, because I know that it is, and that's just a very real aspect of this. So yeah, the financial part is hard, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it.
Like there isn't ever a specific moment where for me I was like, wow, here I am. But I do remember starting to see some patterns that emerged. I remember there were times where I just would get home and not have a lot of energy to do anything else except sit in bed, stare at my phone. But I would start to come home instead, and I would play my flute. I would maybe go sit upstairs instead of in my room. And it was small changes like that that I didn't even realize at the time, like each one of these is a step to getting better. It was like, 3 months later, I'm like, oh, I'm doing homework now. How did I get there? Yeah. To be honest, a lot of those things are still really hard for me. Getting out of bed, not wanting to just fall back on my phone, although I don't think I'm alone in that. But it's that those things became possible. They became options for me to do. From a very objective standard, things are very much better. In freshman year of high school, I was struggling with grades. Now I am on a scholarship to one of the top universities. I used to not know anything about mental health or not know how to talk about it, and now I've able to speak very openly about my mental health. I've given a TEDx talk on the experience. I'm part of my school's peer counseling team. And so in those ways, there are a lot of tangible differences that I'm able to see. And so it's helpful to have those when sometimes I wonder what has changed, what progress have I made? And then I say, wow, the problems that I was struggling with, I'm not struggling with in the same way. What I really want people to know as a family in terms of caring for someone who struggles with their mental health is that the most powerful thing you can do is not try to cheer someone up or point out the bright side, but really just sit with them in the darkness, in the hard feelings they're having, because you can feel so alone when you're in that place. And it's a place that is hard to leave. It's a place that you may need to be in to process what's going on for you. And having someone say, I see you, I'm here for you, I'm going to be with you, is just so powerful. And that is what has really made it possible for me to feel like I have the support I need and to be able to get get to where I am now. It can just make everything so much easier to know that you have someone there who is willing to be with you when you're in that place. Because I think one of my greatest fears is if people saw that side of me, they wouldn't want to be with me. They wouldn't want to know me. And seeing that the opposite was true, that people wanted to see the authentic me even more, is what made me feel comfortable enough to really dive into the treatment, to speak openly about mental health. And that is something I would not trade for the world.